Welcome to Midnight Rain Tales. The world sleeps, and the rain begins to whisper. In this quiet hour, stories drift through the night air, soft, chilling, unforgettable. Here, under the midnight sky, we share the tales the rain refuses to forget. Stay close and listen. The house whispered promises the moment I saw it, a grand old Victorian dame, elegantly dilapidated on the town's fringe. Clara, that's me, finally planting a flag after nomadic years in rented boxes. It was absurdly cheap, the seller practically sprinting away from the closing. A siren song I see now, luring me onto the rocks. That house, my supposed sanctuary, held a secret in its shadowed depths, one that would unravel the very fabric of my reality. A month drifted by, filled with the scent of paint and the rhythm of unpacking. Only the cellar remained unconquered, a subterranean realm thick with the dust of forgotten lives and the previous owner's detritus. Down there, amidst stacks of brittle magazines shedding paper like dead skin, my fingers grazed cold iron, unexpected, alien. Shoving aside cardboard sarcophagi revealed not just a handle, but a portal, a narrow door of wood so dark it seemed to drink the dim light, framed by carvings intricate as fossilized lace. It felt ancient, dissonant against the house's bones. The ornate handle refused purchase, solidly locked. No key surfaced amidst the basement's chaos. Defiance flared alongside intrigue. My toolbox was fetched from upstairs. Metal grated against metal, a shriek in the quiet dark, before the tumblers reluctantly yielded. The door groaned open on protesting hinges, exhaling a breath thick with mildew, earth, and something else. Something metallic and faintly foul. My phone's beam sliced into the void beyond. Cold dread seeped into my marrow. The space was claustrophobic, barely 6 feet square. Its walls crawled with sigils and script unknown to me. Some starkly crimson, disturbingly organic. A lone pedestal table occupied the center, displaying a macabre tableau. Yellowed bones, glass jars cloudy with nameless suspensions, and dominating all, a tome bound in scarred leather. I edged closer, drawn by a morbid gravity, fear warring with a desperate need to know. The book beckoned. Trembling, I lifted the heavy cover. Its pages whispered with the same alien glyphs seen on the walls, punctuated by illustrations of such nightmarish depravity, writhing forms, sacrificial agony that bile rose in my throat. Then the photographs, sepia stains capturing moments of unspeakable torment. My breath hitched, one image, stark and undeniable. This house, decades past, framing a scene of brutal captivity. A man leered, proprietorial, over a woman lashed to a chair, her eyes wide with primal terror. The book slammed shut with a sound like a final judgment. Revulsion churned within me. Wrong. This place, this discovery, fundamentally wrong. Escape, police, anything. But then, a sound from above froze the thought mid-flight. Footfalls, heavy, rhythmic, descending. Not my tread. Impossible. The front door was locked, bolted, yet the steps continued, slow, measured, down the basement stairs, each one a hammer blow against my sanity. Panic flared, where to hide. The cramped cell offered no sanctuary. In pure instinct, I squeezed behind the heavy wooden door I'd just opened, pressing flat against the cold, damp wall, a ludicrously fragile shield. The main basement door creaked open. The deliberate steps crossed the concrete floor, halting directly before the hidden aperture. Silence stretched taut, amplifying the frantic thudding in my chest. Then a voice slithered into the quiet, low and resonant as stones grinding together, laced with ancient malice. "I sense you, little mouse. Your fear is fragrant." A choked gasp escaped my lips. A low chuckle answered, dry as autumn leaves skittering across pavement. "No need for hide and seek," it crooned, the sound horribly playful. "The game is already underway." My thoughts scattered like startled birds. Surrender seemed the only path. Tremors racked my legs as I revealed myself. The entity awaiting me defied mortal logic, towering, draped in a coat that seemed woven from shadow itself. It dominated the space. Its visage, however, was the true horror. Skin like stretched parchment, eyes burning with embers of crimson light, and a smile splitting the face too widely, showcasing teeth like filed obsidian shards. "Ah," it breathed, the sound less speech than exhalation. "The new resident. I have anticipated this." My throat constricted. A scream died stillborn. This was no man. Its elongated hand, tipped with claws like polished jet, reached for me. "Fear not," it rasped, the false comfort chilling. "The transition is intense, yes, but brief." Primal instinct surged, shattering the paralysis. I dove beneath the reaching limb, scrambling backward, then bolting. Up the stairs I flew, fueled by terror, the entity's resonant laughter chasing me like a physical blow. The front door yielded. Cool night air hit my face. Fumbling, frantic, keys scraped against the ignition. The engine roared to life. As I fishtailed out of the drive, tires screaming protest, I risked a glance back. It stood upon the porch, bathed in the pale moonlight, that impossible grin fixed, one hand raised in a gesture of obscene farewell. Headlights carved tunnels through the endless night as I drove, destinationless, propelled only by raw fear. Dawn bled across the horizon before exhaustion forced me to a desolate rest stop. The steering wheel slick beneath my trembling hands. What unholy thing resided in my house? The question echoed in the sudden silence. Police? Useless. They'd see only delusion. A sterile hotel room became my refuge, though sleep offered no escape. Every creak, every shadow morphed into that towering silhouette, those incandescent eyes, that soul-flaying grin. Food lost its taste. My reflection grew gaunt, haunted. After a week adrift in this waking nightmare, a grim certainty settled. I couldn't live like this. Hiding was merely delaying the inevitable. I had to return. I needed to understand. Tuesday afternoon sunlight gilded the Victorian facade, rendering it deceptively benign, almost picturesque. But the charade didn't fool me. I felt the house holding its breath, aware. My key grated in the lock. Silence inside, thick and watchful. Down the stairs, heart hammering against ribs, into the familiar gloom of the basement. The hidden door gaped open, a dark maw. Yet the chamber beyond was utterly bare. No table, no book, no jars, no bones. Just dust motes dancing in the faint light filtering from the stairwell. Had I fractured? Had stress birthed a phantom? Then my gaze snagged on a solitary rectangle of parchment, lying precisely in the center of the floor. With fingers numb and clumsy, I retrieved it. Elegant looping calligraphy spelled out a message that turned my blood to ice. The overture concludes. Expect me. I fled that house and never looked back, jettisoning it at a ruinous loss. the money meaningless against the psychic weight it carried. 5 years have passed. Continents lie between me and that cursed place. My name belongs to someone else now. Yet oblivion remains elusive. In the unguarded hours of sleep, the grinding voice sometimes whispers. The obsidian smile flashes behind my eyelids. I know this isn't finished. It waits, it watches, and someday the true performance will commence. So, heed this cautionary tale if you find yourself drawn to history's shadowed corners, to the allure of the unseen. Some secrets yearn for eternal silence. Disturb them, unlock that forgotten passage, and you invite something in that may never grant you leave. The threshold once crossed remains eternally ajar. The wind moaned through the skeletal frame of the sign, its message. Horizon fuel final chance, 100 miles emptiness. Barely clinging to the rust-eaten metal, my car coughed into the station's gravel embrace, a decision born of desperation, not desire, as the needle trembled over E. A premonition cold and sharp, unlike the night's mild breath, whispered of error. This unremarkable pause on the edge of nowhere felt like stepping onto thin ice over a dark abyss, a threshold I couldn't imagine crossing into such a harrowing ordeal. Julian is my name, the camera my trade. Chasing light across forsaken landscapes, I'd chosen the long way home, a ribbon of asphalt unwinding through the country's forgotten heartlands. Hours bled into hours, marked only by the changing shadows, devoid of human trace. Emerging from the car's cocoon, the quiet wasn't mere absence of sound. It was a presence, a suffocating vacuum that pressed against my eardrums. No thrum of insects, no sigh of distant engines, not even the ghost whine of the ancient pumps. Just this profound stillness raising goose flesh along my arms. The place was a relic, maybe from the era of bell-bottoms and 8-tracks. A lone pump stood like a rusted monument on the fractured concrete expanse. Bars latticed the windows of the adjacent convenience store, a grim little box humming with fluorescent light. Movement flickered within, a small comfort. As the pump gulped fuel into my thirsty tank, my gaze kept snagging on the store's greasy panes. 3 figures moved inside, their gestures sharp, electric with conflict. One, turning abruptly, met my stare across the darkness. The sheer animosity in that fleeting look sent my eyes darting away. The pump clicked off. A moment stretched, taut with indecision. Every nerve ending shrieked, "Flee!" But reason, or perhaps folly, urged me forward. "Just pay," I chided myself, dismissing the unease as fatigue-fueled fantasy. A dissonant clang from the bell above the door announced my entry. Instantly, the low murmur within ceased. 3 heads swiveled, 6 eyes fixed on me. The air thickened, heavy with unspoken things. "Good evening," I managed, aiming for nonchalance. "Just settling up for pump 1. The man behind the counter, his eyes filmed and ancient, gave a slow, deliberate nod, his stare unwavering as he tallied the cost. My cash met his hand, a hand marked with dark, crusted patches. Engine grime, surely. Yet a colder thought slithered in. It bore the ugly hue of old blood. "Got far to go?" The question came from a hulking shape near the dusty shelves, a jagged scar tracing his cheekbone. "Just home," I replied, voice tighter than intended. "An hour, maybe less." My gaze flickered towards the exit. He nodded, a subtle glance passing between him and the others. a silent communication that iced my blood. "You be careful now," he added, his tone flat. "Roads ain't always friendly this time of night." A muttered acknowledgement was all I could offer before practically bolting back to my car. Engine roaring to life, I glanced back. Their silhouettes filled the window, watching. A tremor ran through me as I sped away, desperate to dissolve that place in my rearview mirror. Perhaps 5 miles dissolved behind me when twin lights bloomed in the mirror. Initially unremarkable, but the miles unspooled and the lights remained, a constant, unwavering presence. They neither receded nor advanced to overtake. My hands, slick with sudden sweat, clenched the wheel. Coincidence, I reasoned weakly. Just another traveler on this lonely vein of asphalt. But that same internal alarm, the one that had recoiled from the attendant's stained fingers, screamed otherwise. A test. I eased off the accelerator. The pursuing lights dimmed slightly, maintaining the distance. I pressed down. They brightened, mirroring my surge. My pulse hammered against my ribs. This was deliberate. Squinting into the mirror yielded little, just the blocky shape of a large, dark truck. The pickup I'd seen parked beside the station. The thought sent a glacial dread through me. For 10 agonizing minutes, a desperate dance unfolded. I wove through speed variations, veered onto unlit side paths, hoping to break the strange tether. The notion of stopping, of confrontation, flickered and died. Madness. Each time a brief reprieve suggested escape, the twin beams would inevitably reappear, ghostly predators in the mirror. Panic began its insidious creep. Tremors started in my hands. A cold sweat mapped my spine. Help was a phantom concept out here. My phone displayed only mocking bars of no service. The road and the night were utterly empty, save for us. Abruptly, the chase dynamic shifted. The truck surged forward, engine growling, drawing level with my car. A sideways glance confirmed my fear. The hulking pickup from the station. The driver remained a shadow, but the passenger's profile, etched against the dim interior light, bore the unmistakable line of the scar. Metal groaned as the truck nudged closer, crowding me, forcing me towards the shoulder's crumbling edge. I wrenched the wheel, tires screaming in protest, narrowly avoiding impact. My heart threatened to batter its way out of my chest. Their motive remained terrifyingly obscure. Robbery, or something infinitely worse. Raw desperation took over. I stomped the accelerator to the floor. My aging sedan shrieked, pushed far beyond its comfort. The needle climbing past 90, nudging 100. The landscape dissolved into streaks of light and shadow. The center line became a hypnotic yellow smear. For a fleeting moment, the truck lagged, only for its engine's deeper bellow to signal renewed pursuit. They were relentless. Ahead, almost hidden, a break in the trees, a turnoff. Instinct, not thought, guided my hands. I cranked the wheel violently. Tires lost purchase, skidding sideways onto a rutted, unpaved track. Behind me, the pickup shot past the turn, brakes squealing, a gift of precious seconds. The dirt path was brutal. My car bucked and shuddered, slammed by potholes. Branches clawed at the glass like skeletal fingers. Maintaining control felt impossible, yet primal fear welded my foot to the pedal. The roar of the truck's engine resumed behind me, closing the distance. Panic clawed at the edges of my sanity, but I fought it back. clinging to the desperate hope of escape. There had to be an escape. Just as despair began to settle, a faint glimmer pierced the darkness ahead. Lights, growing stronger, resolving into the comforting geometry of civilization. Houses, the sodium glow of street lamps, the promise of other humans. Never had such mundane sights seemed so profoundly beautiful. I erupted onto a paved main street with a final screech of tortured rubber. The few late-night wanderers froze, startled by my frantic arrival. A final check in the mirror. The pickup eased out from the dirt track's mouth, hesitated under the town's first streetlight, then slowly turned, melting back into the oppressive darkness from which it came. I didn't dare slow down until the reassuring blue sign of the local constabulary appeared. My hands trembled so violently I fumbled the gear shift into park. I practically fell through the station door, wild-eyed and breathless, spilling the night's terror onto the startled duty officer. To their credit, they listened intently, dispatched patrols to scour the highway, to investigate the coordinates of that malevolent little station. But the search yielded nothing. The horizon fuel stop stood empty, dust-laden, appearing utterly derelict, as if shuttered for decades. The following weeks were haunted. Every headlight felt like a threat. Every shadow seemed to hold a waiting figure. I altered my routines, traded my car, even entertained thoughts of relocating entirely. Gradually, as silence persisted, the hypervigilance softened, though it never fully vanished. Why them? Why me? A cruel sport? Intentions of theft? Or something darker still? The questions remain unanswered, suspended forever in the night air of that desolate road. Certain precautions are now ingrained. I shun the empty highways after dusk, and my fuel tank rarely dips below full. Sometimes in the quiet hours, the phantom growl of that pursuing engine echoes in my memory. It serves as a stark testament to how swiftly safety can unravel, how thin the line is between the mundane and the monstrous, often hinging on a single ill-fated turn. The experience carved something new into me, a heightened caution, an undeniable awareness of fragility. Yet I resist letting fear dictate the map of my life. Instead, that terror has been transmuted, poured into my lens, seeking the stark beauty even within isolation, within the very landscapes that held such peril. For I learned the fierce value of existence, how even the moments steeped in dread contribute to the mosaic of self. Occasionally sorting through images, a shot of a forgotten roadside stop or a vacant stretch of highway will snag my breath, pulling me back for an instant, heart pounding, palms damp. Then a conscious inhale. I am here, I am safe, and I continue my work. Because ultimately that is the only response. To keep moving forward, acknowledging the phantoms in the mirror, but never letting them steer. The genesis of it all remains etched vividly in my memory, crystallizing in the post-lunch torpor of a Tuesday. Within the sterile geometry of the office, under the ubiquitous hum and unforgiving glare of fluorescent tubes, a hush had fallen. Colleagues lingered elsewhere, perhaps dissecting the morning's dramas in the break room or pursuing caffeine down the echoing hallway. I, Ilara, resided within my fabric-walled partition, eyes locked onto a spreadsheet whose columns blurred into instruments of headache. An utterly unremarkable afternoon, yet threaded with an unseen, dissonant chord. Initially, it was merely a prickle of awareness, a subliminal sense that the vacant air wasn't truly empty. My gaze swept the aisles, finding only beige monotony and unoccupied chairs. The building breathed its climate-controlled sigh, punctuated by the faint electrical buzz overhead. Dismissing it as fatigue, I refocused on the numbers, the familiar midday lethargy settling heavy on my eyelids. Then a sound, soft, intimate, a dry whisper against the thin carpet. It mimicked the exact friction of my own chair rolling backward. I paused, breath held, and looked down. My chair was moving, not abruptly, but with a slow, inexorable creep away from the desk's edge. Millimeter by glacial millimeter, it slid. No draft stirred the papers on my desk. The ventilation system, a known quantity, had never possessed such motive force. A spike of adrenaline pierced the calm. My palms grew damp. Motionless, voiceless, I simply watched its uncanny pilgrimage until abruptly it ceased. Nothing visible accounted for it. No strings, no prankster, nothing. A few heartbeats passed in frozen silence. My thoughts scrambled for purchase on the ledge of logic. Uneven flooring, unbalanced casters. Yet this chair, my daily companion for months, had never exhibited such autonomy. With a hand that trembled slightly, betraying an internal tremor I fought to suppress, I reached out and drew it back into place. A part of me recoiled from the strangeness, desperate to preserve the ordinary, to finish the spreadsheet, to escape on schedule. Stress, I told myself firmly. Just stress manifesting oddly. Rising, I undertook a furtive reconnaissance. Neighboring cubicles stood empty, their occupants' personalities hinted at by framed photos and neglected stress balls. But their machines were dark, their chairs vacant. The main corridor stretched away, silent and unpopulated. I listened, straining for the telltale scuff of a shoe or a suppressed giggle. Only the building's low thrum answered. Defeated and increasingly disquieted, I returned to my station, attempting to bury the incident beneath layers of work. The remainder of the day unfolded without further peculiarity. Leaving the office that evening, a residue of unease clung to me, dismissed again as simple exhaustion. The following morning dawned with deceptive normalcy. My chair sat obediently where I'd left it. The computer booted without complaint. I logged my arrival, summoned the familiar spreadsheets, and settled into the rhythm of the workday. I even managed a wry internal chuckle at yesterday's absurdity, convincing myself my senses had momentarily faltered, but normalcy proved fragile. Mid-afternoon, deep in the composition of an email, a new sound intruded, faint, rapid clicking, the distinct staccato of a computer mouse being agitated. It emanated from a cubicle 2 rows behind mine, a station perpetually unoccupied, its hardware ostensibly powered down. My typing ceased. I listened intently. The clicking persisted for perhaps 5 seconds, a frantic little burst of activity, then vanished. Rising, I navigated the partitions to the source. The monitor remained a blank obsidian rectangle. Beneath the desk, the computer tower was inert. No lights glowing, no fans whirring. The mouse rested placidly on its pad. A frisson crawled up my arms as I stared at the silent setup. I even lifted the mouse, clicking its buttons experimentally, seeking some residual charge, some mechanical glitch. Nothing. The system was unequivocally offline. This incident sharpened my senses. Henceforth, I became acutely attuned to the office's soundscape. The phantom clicks weren't an isolated event. Over the ensuing week, sporadic bursts of keyboard clatter or brief flurries of mouse clicks would erupt from deserted corners of the floor. Each time, my investigation yielded the same result: silent workstations, dark screens. After the first recurrence, I flagged it to the IT department, suggesting potential electrical interference or network anomalies. They performed their diagnostics, probed the hardware, and returned a verdict of no issues found. Their reassurances felt hollow. My vigilance intensified. Headphones became unthinkable. I needed my hearing unobstructed. Every stray tap or click sent a jolt along my spine. Reason warred with experience. This couldn't be happening, yet it undeniably was. Anxiety began to erode my focus, leaching into my nights, disrupting sleep. My productivity plummeted. The office, once a neutral space, now felt charged with latent, inexplicable energy, and the urge to flee at day's end became overwhelming. Then came the coffee break incident. It was late afternoon, perhaps 3 o'clock. Tension coiled tight in my shoulders, prompting the need for strong coffee to propel me through the final hours. I saved my work meticulously, locked my computer, double-checking the lock screen's familiar visage, a habit born of rising paranoia, and headed towards the break room. A chance encounter in the hallway with a colleague, Leo, delayed me with project talk for a few minutes. Afterward, I proceeded to the coffee machine, poured a cup, and waited, blowing gently on the steaming liquid until it was drinkable. Returning to my cubicle, nothing initially seemed amiss. But as I settled into my chair, I saw it. The monitor was illuminated. Open on the screen was a document I hadn't created, hadn't seen before. Leaning closer, heart quickening, I tried to decipher the contents. It resembled a text file filled with lines of characters that defied comprehension, not random gibberish, but structured in a way that hinted at meaning, yet remained stubbornly opaque, like corrupted data or text typed with frantic, nonsensical haste. My first thought, that I'd accidentally opened it before locking the screen, evaporated under the certainty that I hadn't. With a growing sense of dread, I closed the file without saving. A quick check of recent documents revealed it had been created mere minutes before, precisely during my absence. The timestamp mocked my locked screen, my secure password. No one could have accessed it. That evening, I cornered the IT technicians again, pleading with them to search for remote access breaches, malware, anything. They ran comprehensive scans, scrutinized system logs, and once more declared everything clean. One offered a thin joke about an office ghost. I managed a brittle laugh, but a cold knot formed in my stomach. Ghosts weren't in my lexicon, yet the unexplained phenomena persisted. A constant, low-grade sense of being watched now permeated my workday. Even under the bright lights, the air felt heavy, expectant. Small, sudden noises made me jump. I curtailed my working hours, avoiding the office when it grew quiet and empty. In the subsequent days, the disturbances became subtler yet more insidious. Returning after a brief trip to the printer or a filing cabinet across the room, I'd find my chair angled slightly differently. Not every time, but often enough to confirm it wasn't my imagination. On several occasions, I returned from locking my screen to find an arbitrary folder open on the desktop. Never anything critical, but unsettling proof of activity in my absence. Hesitantly, I confided in a couple of trusted colleagues. Initial reactions ranged from gentle teasing about overwork to suggestions of needing more sleep. Eventually, however, I persuaded Leo, the colleague from the hallway, to stay late with me one evening, hoping for corroboration. We sat in the hushed twilight office, waiting. For half an hour, silence reigned. Then, around 7, it came. The distinct, soft tapping of a keyboard from 2 rows over. Leo's eyes widened, meeting mine in shared astonishment. We crept towards the sound's origin together. Predictably, the workstation was dark, the tower cold, cables inert. Leo, visibly spooked, examined everything. "Okay," he murmured, shaking his head. "I believe you." His validation was cold comfort. It confirmed my sanity, but offered no solution. We reported this joint experience to IT. Another round of checks, another shrug, another nothing found. Their patience, I sensed, was wearing thin. I was left adrift with the bizarre pattern. Phantom noises, moving objects, inexplicable digital intrusions. Dread became my default state upon entering the building each morning, a knot of anxiety tightening as I approached my workstation, wondering what new anomaly awaited. One evening, trapped by a looming deadline, I stayed late. The cleaning crew hummed distantly, their vacuum cleaner a remote drone in the otherwise silent building. I was alone in my section. My phone, battery depleted, offered no escape into music or podcasts. Focus proved elusive, tension gripping my neck and back. Every few minutes, my head snapped up, scanning the periphery, anticipating movement, expecting sound. As I typed, a sudden localized coldness enveloped my back, sharp and distinct against the ambient office temperature. My breath hitched. I spun around in my chair, half expecting a figure standing there. Nothing. Emptiness. Yet the chair beneath me seemed to jolt, a subtle nudge as if brushed by an unseen hand. My heart hammered against my ribs, loud in the stillness. Without saving, without finishing, I shut down the computer, snatched my bag, and fled. The report could wait. I finished it remotely from the safety of my home. Returning was unavoidable, but the dread was now a permanent fixture. Approaching my cubicle became a ritual of apprehension. Check the chair's position, check the monitor's status. Sometimes blessed normalcy, other times small deviations. A post-it note I hadn't written, desktop icons rearranged. It felt like sharing my space with an invisible, meticulous, yet ultimately inscrutable presence. The thought of requesting a desk move surfaced, but articulating the reason. The spectral clicks, the migrating chair, the phantom documents felt like admitting delusion. Fear of dismissal, of being labeled unstable, kept me silent. The days bled together, punctuated by these unsettling events. Brief lulls offered false hope, inevitably shattered by the return of the clicks from a dead machine or a new inexplicable window open on my screen. Never overtly threatening, yet the cumulative effect was profoundly unnerving. My work suffered, my interactions grew strained, my nerves frayed. Sleep offered little respite. Finally, the strain became unbearable. I approached HR requesting a departmental transfer, citing vague personal reasons and the need for a change of environment. They promised to look into it. While awaiting their decision, I took refuge in frequent breaks, escaping the oppressive confines of my cubicle. Yet each departure felt like leaving something vulnerable, unguarded. Often, upon returning, my unease was justified by some small, fresh alteration to my workspace. News of the approved transfer brought a wave of profound relief that overshadowed any professional excitement. On my final day in that haunted corner of the office, I packed my few belongings. Powering down the computer for the last time felt like a small act of reclaiming control, of severing a connection. Yet, as I slung my bag over my shoulder, preparing to leave, I heard it, a faint, dry scrape. Turning, I saw my chair tilt back almost imperceptibly, echoing its first uncanny movement. I didn't linger. I walked away, pulse drumming without looking back. In my new location, on a different floor, the phenomena have ceased. Relaxation has slowly returned. My focus is restored. Yet the memory of that cubicle remains, a persistent shadow. Sometimes passing near that section of the building, an involuntary glance searches the familiar row. I half expect to see the chair gliding silently or a screen flickering to life with cryptic text. Few know the full story. Dismissal or disbelief is the likely response. But I know something resided there, an unseen collaborator tinkering in the quiet moments, leaving faint, unsettling traces of its passage. The certainty of it, the feeling of having been observed, subtly manipulated by forces unknown, lingers still, a cold echo in the back of my mind. The instant my gaze fell upon the deep furrows clawing through the motel room plaster, a sickening certainty bloomed. Checking into this place was a catastrophic error, but the lock had clicked. The night outside had deepened into an impenetrable velvet, and escape was no longer an option. The hours ahead promised a descent into waking terror. Endless asphalt had spooled behind me, each mile a lead weight pressing down on my eyelids. Then a lurid pulse against the oppressive dark, the neon viscera of the Somnus Inn, a siren song promising oblivion in a bed before the dawn demanded my journey resume. Fool that I was, I hadn't pressed on. Its gravel lot lay mostly barren beneath the buzzing sign, hosting only a pair of rust-pocked pickups and my own weary sedan. Within the office, a cramped box thick with the ghosts of stale tobacco and cloying chemical pine, presided a figure seemingly carved from driftwood and disdain. He barely shifted his gaze from the flickering cathode ray tube relic squatting on the counter as he slid the key, room 13, across the scarred formica. "Checkout's 11, he rasped, his attention already retreating to the screen's hypnotic dance. Only later would I recall the fugitive flicker in his eyes towards the door as I turned, the almost imperceptible tremor in the hand that relinquished the key. Fatigue, however, is a potent blinder, and the siren call of sleep drowned out the dissonant chords of warning. The path to my assigned door felt unnaturally elongated, a corridor of profound silence punctuated solely by the crunch of my shoes on the gravel and the distant, mournful drone of the highway. Reaching the door marked 13, a sudden, irrational hesitation arrested my hand above the tarnished knob. A wrongness permeated the air, thin and sharp, yet I dismissed it as a phantom of exhaustion and breached the threshold. Inside awaited the expected tableau of transient despair, wallpaper peeling like sunburnt skin, a mattress bowed with the memory of countless sleepers, a television set that might have witnessed history unfold in grainy black and white. Yet it was the walls that seized my focus, held it captive. Through the weak moonlight filtering past threadbare curtains, the plaster bore witness to a frenzy of scoring. Gouges ran rampant, some short, staccato bursts of panic, others long, deliberate grooves, as if a captive entity had sought egress through the very structure of the room. My travel bag slipped from nerveless fingers. Weariness evaporated, replaced by a chilling hyper-awareness. I drew closer, tracing the violent calligraphy that marred not just one surface, but all four walls, even spider webbing onto the ceiling in places. Certain scars looked ancient, their edges smoothed by time's passage. Others seemed horrifyingly recent, the paint around them still curled back like freshly wounded flesh. An icy rivulet traced my spine as my fingertips explored the raw channels. What desperation, what thing could inflict such damage? And why, in this place of perpetual turnover, had no one bothered to conceal the evidence? A primal urge to flee surged. Demand another room, demand a refund, just leave. But as my hand reached for the interior doorknob, a sound arrested me, a delicate, dry skittering emanating from somewhere deeper within the room's confines. I froze, my pulse a frantic drum against my ribs. Silence. Then the sound returned, amplified, insistent. It seemed to originate from behind the closed bathroom door. Against the screaming klaxons of self-preservation, I found myself drifting towards that door. The skittering intensified, now interwoven with a low guttural vibration that resonated deep in my bones, raising the fine hairs on my nape. Trembling, I extended a hand towards the knob. The instant my skin grazed the cool, pitted metal, the noises ceased utterly. The ensuing silence pressed in, somehow more menacing than the preceding cacophony. How long I remained there, poised between action and paralysis, I cannot say. My fingers rested on the knob, mind a whirlwind of terror, body locked in stasis. Eventually, forcing movement, I retreated a step, then another, my gaze riveted to the impassive bathroom door. My heels struck the bed frame. I nearly vaulted from my skin. Turning sharply, my breath hitched. There, partially obscured by the drooping bed skirt, lay a journal. Its cover, a dark, indeterminate material, felt brittle and scarred, eerily mirroring the tormented walls. With hands that shook violently, I retrieved it. Its pages, yellowed and fragile, were dense with frantic, sloping script, a litany of pleas and fragmented observations. Phrases leapt out, branding themselves onto my consciousness. It wakes with the dark. Avoid the glass reflection. The scraping never ends. The final entry, penned in a spidery, disintegrating hand, offered only this: if you are reading this, you are already lost. It perceives your presence. A deafening slam from the bathroom flung the journal from my grasp. The door vibrated violently within its frame, assaulted from the other side by tremendous rhythmic force. Pure instinct propelled me towards the room's exit, heart hammering against my sternum like a trapped bird. The handle refused to yield. I wrenched it, desperation clawing at my throat, but it remained stubbornly, impossibly locked. I was sealed within. The assault on the bathroom door escalated, a furious percussion accompanied by the shriek of splintering wood and the groaning protest of tortured hinges. My eyes darted wildly, seeking an alternative escape. The window. I scrambled towards it, only to find it fused shut, the glass thick, unyielding. Defeated, I spun back towards the room's center, and my gaze snagged on the large mirror, affixed to the wall. For one heart-stopping, hallucinatory second, its surface held more than my own reflection. A shape crouched there, amorphous, hunched, impossibly dark, pierced by eyes that burned with a cold, alien luminescence. I blinked, and the vision dissolved. With a final explosive crack, the bathroom door disintegrated inwards, showering the threadbare carpet with wooden shrapnel. Through the ruined opening, I glimpsed movement, the suggestion of a form utterly incongruous with the known, sane world. Before squeezing my eyes shut and shrinking into the furthest corner, pressing myself flat against the ravaged wall, I heard it emerge, a wet, shuffling gait, breath drawn in ragged, painful gasps, the sickening click-scrape of claws on worn linoleum drawing nearer. Then came the smell, an unholy miasma of subterranean decay, and something else, something fundamentally wrong. Eyes clamped shut, I offered silent, incoherent prayers to any indifferent deity. The scraping sound was no longer localized. It surrounded me, a frantic symphony on the walls, the floor closing in ever closer. And then absolute silence descended. The room held only the frantic rhythm of my own breathing. Hesitantly bracing for unimaginable sights, I peeled open my eyelids. The room stood empty, no monstrous presence, no shattered bathroom door. It hung intact on its hinges. Even the deep, violent scratches had vanished from the walls, leaving behind smooth, undisturbed paint, as if the preceding terror had been nothing but a fever dream. For a disorienting moment, I grasped at the explanation of sheer exhaustion conjuring phantoms. But then my eyes found the journal, still lying open on the floor where it had fallen. Trembling fingers retrieved it, opened it. The pages were utterly blank, every single one. The details blur after that. A fugue state must have claimed me, allowing passage from that room, from that inn. I drove, propelled by raw adrenaline, chasing the receding night until the sun climbed high, painting the sky in mocking pastels, finding myself states away. I have relentlessly tried to rationalize it, a waking nightmare born of sleep deprivation, nothing more. Yet sometimes in the deepest hours when the world sleeps, I hear it, that faint, dry skittering just beyond my own door. A certainty resides in my marrow. The entity from that room endures, watches, waits, and occasionally, catching my own reflection unawares, I perceive another gaze, looking back from within the glass, eyes aglow in the dimness, belonging to something that smiles with far too many teeth. I avoid motels now. Sleep itself has become a fraught territory, rarely visited, because the truth is undeniable. Certain realities fray at the edges, harboring things that defy logic, things that fester in the shadowed corners of roadside stops and haunt the liminal spaces between what is and what should not be. I know with chilling certainty that one day the scratches will manifest on my own walls. The journal will reappear, its pages once again filled with doomed warnings. And the presence from room 13 will arrive to conclude what it began. Until that inescapable moment, I drive. Perpetual motion is my only solace, never lingering, never truly resting, because on the road, under the vast indifference of the sky, I can almost pretend that night was an illusion, almost believe I am safe. But the deeper knowledge persists. There is no true escape from room 13, not ever. The day had abraded the soul, leaving me frayed, needing just moments of quiet suspension before the journey home. Thus, I sought the station lavatory, one of those sequestered chambers in a seldom-trod corner, an appendix to the main concourse. Emptiness reigned. The vast station breathed shallowly, punctuated only by the spectral resonance of distant, solitary footfalls. Midnight loomed, or perhaps had already passed, and the silence was a balm I craved. Simple ablutions, a splash of cool water to rinse away the grit of hours. That was the extent of my ambition. Inside, the light was a jaundiced flicker, fluorescent tubes warring with shadow across the crazed geography of the tiles. A low electric hum stitched the quiet together. I retreated into a stall, the bolt sliding home with a decisive click, hoping for insulation, for breath. Leaning back against the cool metal partition, I let my eyes drift shut, attempting a brief erasure of the world. Then came a sound, barely there, a soft friction, a hesitant shuff, as if something or someone dragged itself just beyond the door. My senses snapped taut, listening. The sound vanished as swiftly as it arose, leaving only the persistent thrumming overhead. Just another late-night traveler, I reasoned, as weary as I. Relaxation attempted a tentative return, eyes closed once more. But it came again, louder this time, unmistakable. A slow, grating scrape, the harsh negotiation of something solid against the tiled floor, originating just outside my flimsy partition. My eyes flew open, heart leaping against my ribs like a trapped bird. I peered down, seeing only the dull, stained squares beneath the gap. The scraping continued, deliberate, unhurried, drawing undeniably closer. My fists clenched, breath caught tight in my throat. Make no sound, betray nothing. A faint shadow elongated beneath the door, creeping inward. Suddenly violating the narrow space, an object materialized. Small, dark, circular, a lens, unmistakably a camera lens, pressed low against the floor, held steady by an unseen hand. It pointed directly toward me. Panic surged, hot and suffocating, my pulse thundering, surely audible in the tense quiet. My mind blanked, a white screen of pure terror. Don't move, don't react. But the fear was a physical presence clawing its way up my throat. With excruciating slowness, I lifted my feet from the floor, pressing myself backward, trying to dissolve into the stall's grimy wall. The lens remained, static, a cold, unblinking eye, waiting. An age passed in suspended heartbeats before the lens retracted, slipping back into the gloom beyond the door. A ragged, trembling breath escaped me. My hands shook, gripping the sides of the stall for support. I waited, straining to hear any sign of departure, any movement. Nothing. Only silence, now thick with menace. Gathering myself, forcing shallow breaths, I wrestled with the decision: stay trapped or face whatever waited. With infinite care, I turned the lock, easing the door open just a sliver. The restroom stretched before me, seemingly empty, bathed in the sputtering light. The low hum its only pulse. I risked a cautious step out, eyes scanning every corner, heart still a frantic drum against my sternum. Then movement. From the deepest shadow in the far corner, a figure resolved itself, standing utterly still, watching. I couldn't discern features, only the stark silhouette, the unnerving stillness, and in their hand, the faint luminescence of a phone screen held as if recording. A cold fist clenched in my stomach. They had been waiting. Fear, stark and paralyzing, locked my muscles. Run, my mind screamed, but my feet were welded to the floor. I stood frozen, staring, synapses firing uselessly. Then, without preamble, the figure detached itself from the shadows, taking a single, deliberate step forward. In that brief movement, I caught a glimpse of a face, pale, utterly devoid of expression, with eyes that seemed to pierce the dimness, fixing me. No word, no sound, just another step closer, the gaze unwavering, predatory. Instinct finally broke the paralysis. I pivoted, launching myself toward the exit, my flight echoing unnervingly in the tiled chamber. Behind me, I heard them follow, not running but walking, a steady, unhurried pace that spoke of chilling certainty. I burst through the door, back into the cavernous station, desperately scanning the platforms for any sign of life, any witness, any help. Vacant. Only the distant, indifferent hum of the tracks and the oppressive dark. I didn't stop, didn't slow until I was out on the street, gasping under the sickly orange glow of the streetlights. The station a dark mouth behind me. A hurried glance over my shoulder. Nothing. Just the empty terminus, silent, inscrutable, as if the preceding minutes had been a hallucination. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I flinched violently. Pulling it out with unsteady hands, I saw the notification. One new message. Unknown number. A tremor ran down my spine as I opened it. 3 words swam on the screen. Nice to see you. Nausea rose. Bile in my throat. Who? How did they have my number? The unseen eyes felt present again, pressing close even through the device. I deleted the message, powered off the phone, and began the walk home. Each step heavy, glancing constantly behind me, feeling their presence like a second shadow I couldn't outpace. Sleep that night was a shallow, haunted thing. Every creak of the building, every distant siren was amplified, twisted into the sound of approach. I checked the door locks compulsively, peered through the blinds, but the sensation of being watched, violated, was indelible. Days bled into a week. I began to rationalize, to frame it as a bizarre, isolated incident, some disturbed individual's idea of a scare. Then another buzz, another unknown number, this time an image attached. A photograph of me, taken from behind, walking down a busy street earlier that day, utterly unaware. The terror returned, immediate and suffocating. My hands shook as I stared at my own captured unawareness. They were still out there, close, unseen. The messages became a grim cadence in my life. More photos, me at a cafe, waiting for a bus, entering my building, snippets of information, the color of the scarf I'd worn, a comment about a book I carried the time I'd left work. My grasp on reality felt tenuous. Every stranger became a potential observer, every shadow a hiding place. I went to the authorities, presented the chilling digital trail. Sympathy, frustration, but ultimately inaction. Not enough evidence, they said. No clear threat. I changed my number, found a new apartment across town, shredded my routines, becoming deliberately unpredictable. It changed nothing. The messages persisted, finding me unerringly, each one a cold reminder. You are seen, always. And now, even as I write this, trying to anchor myself to the narrative, my phone vibrates again beside me. Another message has arrived. A constriction seized Elias's chest upon waking, clammy skin beneath his fringe, though the pre-dawn air held no undue warmth. An indefinable wrongness permeated the quiet. He navigated the cramped apartment, skirting a forgotten splay of brushes, a constellation of stiff bristles on the worn floorboards. The corridor to his sanctuary lay steeped in shadow. A tremor ran through his hand as he flicked the switch, chasing the darkness back. Pushing the studio door yielded the acrid tang of fresh pigment. Not solvent-soaked rags left carelessly overnight, he realized with dawning dread. No, the canvas enthroned on the easel. It wore a different face. Elias stared, his eyes gritty, unblinking. A futile blink, then another. The image held fast, refusing to resolve into familiarity. This was not the vista he'd relinquished to the night. A knot tightened low in his gut, his throat constricting as if gripped by an invisible hand. Landscapes were his refuge. 10 years devoted to capturing the tranquil sigh of seascapes, the hushed reverence of woodlands. Yesterday evening's work, a meadow bathed in the soft gold of late sun, nearing completion with ethereal cloud touches brushed onto a serene sky. He'd stepped away near midnight, leaving peace rendered in oil. Now, desolation stared back. The vibrant greens had soured to a murky, sodden brown, evoking decay rather than life. Above, the sky sagged under an oppressive gray mantle, bruised with streaks of black that bled like ink from the clouds towards the skeletal tree line. That jarring shift alone might have seeded doubt in his memory, a question of his own perception, but something else commanded his gaze, held it captive. A form lurking at the meadow's distant edge, near a dense clutch of trees. Faceless yet hunched, leaning forward as if in morbid contemplation or perhaps searching for something lost. The paint there in that specific area glistened, newly applied, hours old at most. He hadn't painted that. Those umber shadows, that obsidian wash leaching into the horizon, they weren't born from his palette nor his intention. Elias edged closer, breath catching, inspecting the alien brushwork. His pulse hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Sweat pricked his brow anew. A hesitant fingertip met the surface near the figure, tacky, not yet cured. He stood frozen for a long moment, adrift in a sea of disbelief. Was his mind fraying at the edges? Had exhaustion driven him to paint in some nocturnal fugue state, leaving no trace in his waking consciousness? His legs felt unsteady, rooted yet trembling as he retreated from the easel. Calm. He needed calm. Water, perhaps. A moment to reset the frantic spinning of his thoughts. In the kitchen, his hands betrayed him, the glass rattling against the faucet's lip. The refrigerator's low, monotonous hum filled the otherwise oppressive silence. He focused on the condensation beading on the cool glass, sipping slowly, commanding his ragged breath to deepen, to steady. Thoughts skittered like frantic insects. Intrusion, somnambulistic artistry, yet the locks held firm, windows secured, latches untouched. Nothing else in the small apartment was disturbed. The sheer ordinariness of his surroundings mocked his rising panic. Glass set aside with a quiet click, a final scan of the mundane, then back, inevitably, to the studio's unnerving heart. The watcher remained, a sentinel in the grim landscape. Elias fought down the chill crawling up his spine, the prickle of fear on his skin. Repaint it, erase the anomaly, restore the intended peace. He armed himself with a clean brush, squeezed a hopeful dollop of viridian green onto his palette, but the canvas resisted his efforts. The fresh pigment smeared, refusing purchase, blending into a hideous, muddy slurry with the still damp underlayer. Defeated after several frustrating attempts, he surrendered, his gaze drawn unwillingly, magnetically to the distant, unsettling shape. Best leave it for today. He sought refuge in smaller sketches, quick watercolors in another corner of the room. Anything to soothe the jangled nerves, to feel control over line and color again. That evening became a ritual of security, bordering on paranoia. Bolts thrown, latches double-checked on windows and the single door. He even positioned a small battery-operated, motion-activated lamp within the studio, its plastic eye trained unwaveringly on the easel. A foolish precaution, he told himself, perhaps merely to catch his own sleepwalking self in the act, to provide a rational explanation. Dinner was a tasteless affair, his eyes consciously avoiding the looming canvas that seemed to radiate a cold presence. Tension coiled tightly in his shoulders, his back aching from a day spent hunched and wary, as if anticipating a blow. Sleep beckoned, but offered little promise of peace. His phone lay close on the nightstand, a sentinel against unseen disturbances in the night. Sleep was a shallow, troubled thing, punctuated by fitful awakenings into suffocating darkness. The motion sensor remained stubbornly dark, inactive. Morning arrived not with relief, but with a quickening pulse, a familiar dread tightening its grip. He pushed open the studio door. The scent of fresh oils struck him immediately, more potent than before, undeniable. His gaze snapped to the easel. Darker now, the sky threatened imminent storm, heavy and bruised, and the figure, it had advanced, crept forward perhaps 5 or 6 paces deeper into the ruined meadow, closer to the foreground, closer to him. A shiver traced the length of his spine, gooseflesh prickling his arms despite the room's stillness. He glanced at the motion sensor, still correctly positioned, its small battery indicator light glowing a steady, mocking green, untriggered. Elias reached out, a familiar dread accompanying the gesture like a shadow, damp, sticky to the touch. He rubbed his thumb and forefinger together, the tacky resistance sickeningly familiar. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. A frantic search of the apartment yielded nothing. Locks secure, floors unmarked. No intruder, spectral or otherwise. He fumbled for his phone, documenting the corrupted canvas with quick, trembling photos, then recorded a shaky video, his voice strained, barely a whisper, narrating the impossible progression, proof against his own dissolving sanity, a digital anchor in a sea of the inexplicable. Days bled into a nightmarish cycle, each dawn bringing fresh violations to his canvases. The malevolence wasn't confined to the meadow painting. It began to spread like a contagion. A nascent study of sun-kissed mountain peaks, barely sketched the evening before. A simple outline, a whisper of dawn color washed across the upper canvas, greeted him utterly transformed. The peaks now brooded under heavy, unnatural shadows, and perched high on a crag, a new silhouette echoed the unsettling posture of the meadow figure, gazing down into an unseen valley. A familiar tightness seized his throat. These weren't random defacements, not mere scribbles. They possessed structure, depth, a chilling deliberation. It was the work of a skilled hand, somehow impossibly manifest in his sealed, solitary apartment. Desperation drove him to keep vigil within the studio itself. Curled uncomfortably on a small divan pushed against the far wall, his phone, mounted securely on a tripod, became his unblinking electronic eye recording the long, silent hours. The first night of this self-imposed surveillance, he startled awake several times, peering through the gloom at the easel. Unchanged, a fragile tendril of relief allowed him to drift back into uneasy slumber. Morning shattered it completely. The painting mocked him, altered anew. The figure in the meadow had shifted again, and it was no longer alone. A companion stood beside it, dimmer, less defined, but undeniably present, both now oriented towards the viewer. Elias scrolled numbly through the night's recording on his phone. It showed only his restless sleep, his brief, anxious inspections of the canvas from the divan. The painting itself, within the phone's unwavering digital frame, remained static throughout the recording. No spectral artists materialized. No brushes danced on unseen currents of air. Yet the physical reality before him screamed otherwise. An inexplicable, maddening paradox. After the fourth night, perhaps the fifth, the days had begun to blur into a monotonous cycle of dread and discovery. He abandoned the futile recording. Exhaustion etched dark, bruised hollows beneath his eyes. A constant low-grade nausea churned in his stomach. Entering the studio now felt like stepping into a cage with an unseen predator. He persisted with other work, smaller pieces, forcing himself through the motions, but the confidence that once flowed freely from mind to hand now trickled, hesitant and uncertain. What was happening to him, to his art? He reached out to Julian, a friend, hoping desperately for a witness, for external validation of the impossible. But Julian couldn't stay the night, and during the day, the paintings remained stubbornly fixed in their morning state, offering no performance for visitors. Julian, pragmatic and concerned, offered the expected solace. Stress, overwork, perhaps some bizarre dissociative episode, manifesting creatively through his subconscious. Elias possessed no counter-evidence, only a deep, visceral certainty that this rational explanation felt hollow, utterly wrong. One twilight, resolve hardened within him like cooling metal. He would reclaim his canvas, he would fight back. Positioning a bright work lamp to flood the meadow painting with harsh, unforgiving light, he sat before it, brush clutched tight, knuckles white, like a weapon against the encroaching strangeness. He attacked the figures, laying down thick, obliterating strokes of ochre and forest green, striving furiously to restore the memory of trees, of earth, burying the unsettling shapes beneath layers of defiant pigment. The air grew thick and heavy with the fumes of turpentine and oil. His chest remained tight, a persistent ache beneath his ribs, mirroring the tension in his grip. An hour passed in furious, silent concentration until, finally, the silhouettes vanished beneath layers of insistent paint. Streaked with sweat, breathing heavily, he stepped back. Messy, overworked perhaps, but blessedly empty of those forms. A fragile, tentative calm settled over him. He dragged a hard, folding chair into the studio, planting himself directly opposite the easel. Tonight, he would not sleep. An energy drink, sipped slowly, became his ally against the crushing weight of fatigue. The unforgiving chair pressed into his spine, a constant reminder of his vigil, but he ignored the discomfort, his eyes fixed, burning, on the now blank section of the canvas. Midnight slid past. The apartment's profound silence amplified every tiny creak of the building, every internal thrum of his own heightened anxiety. His eyelids grew heavy as lead. He stretched, tapped a foot rhythmically on the floorboards, blinked furiously against the encroaching drowsiness that felt thick as fog. Then, somewhere near 2 a.m, the battle was lost. Oblivion claimed him, pulling him down into a brief, dreamless void. A violent jerk snapped him awake. 3:17 a.m. glowed accusingly from his phone screen, stark white numbers in the dim light. His neck screamed in protest from the awkward angle of his slumber. He looked at the painting. Ice flooded his veins, stopping his breath. The laborious layers of paint he'd applied, gone, vanished utterly, as if they'd never been brushed onto the canvas, and the figures stood resurrected, rendered now with a chilling, undeniable clarity. Worse, impossibly, terrifyingly worse, they now possessed faces, vacant expressions, yet their eyes bored directly forward, fixed on him. A visceral coldness enveloped him, his arms erupting in violent tremors. The half-empty energy drink slipped from his numb grasp, clattering, rolling across the floorboards, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness. He scrambled upright, heart slamming against his ribs like a trapped bird, fumbling uselessly with the lamp switch, though the overhead light already cast a stark, clinical glare on the scene. Bile rose hot and bitter in his throat. Elias forced his gaze onto the painted faces. They met his stare with an unnerving, preternatural intensity that crawled beneath his skin, raising the hairs on his arms. Fine lines like crazing on old porcelain were etched around their eyes. The pigment was layered in a way that granted them a stark, undeniable presence, a disturbing semblance of life. He reached out, dreading the confirmation his senses would provide. Dry, utterly dry to the touch, as if finished hours ago, mocking his recent, futile efforts at erasure. He stumbled backward, tripping over the discarded folding chair, a raw curse tearing from his throat as he caught himself on the doorframe. His breathing came in ragged, painful gasps. The rest of the night dissolved into frantic, aimless pacing, from the studio to the bedroom, opening his closet, snatching a thick, dark blanket. Back in the studio, he flung the covering over the easel, obscuring the horror. He couldn't bear their gaze any longer. How? The question echoed, relentless, unanswered in the frantic, echoing spaces of his mind. Dawn seeped into the apartment like gray water, finding Elias hollow-eyed, sleepless, adrift. In the kitchen, the splash of water into the sink seemed unnaturally loud, intrusive. He stared into the dark circle of the drain, the thought of flight momentarily tempting, fleeing to Julian's anywhere but here. But his life, his work, his tools, his very identity were rooted in this space. And what if the affliction wasn't the place, but him? Would the canvases continue to warp and change wherever he went, haunted by his presence? He returned to the studio, a condemned man drawn back inexorably to his cell. With trembling hands, he pulled the blanket away. The faces stared back, seeming even harsher, more defined in the unforgiving morning light. Phone out again. Photos snapped, fired off to Julian with a desperate, rambling message typed with shaking thumbs. Evidence, a plea for witness. Silence answered it was still early. He needed action, something to push back against the encroaching madness. Cleaning brushes offered a brief, mechanical solace, the familiar chemical sting of solvent momentarily grounding. Yesterday's failure gnawed at him, a bitter reminder of his impotence, but defiance surged anew, hot and reckless. He wouldn't surrender his art, his space, his sanity without a fight. A fresh tube of pale gray paint yielded its contents onto the palette. He attacked the canvas again, scrubbing, layering with thick impasto, determined this time to obliterate those faces. Every haunting line, every disturbing detail. Breathing hard, his shirt clinging damply to his back, fingers aching from the tense grip on the brush handle, he finally stepped away, satisfied for now that nothing showed through. He leaned the canvas carefully against the wall, facing inward this time. Tonight, he vowed fiercely, he would not share the room with it. Observation, yes, perhaps from the doorway, but from a distance. That evening, driven by a desperate, almost superstitious impulse, Elias laid the canvas face down upon the protective plastic sheeting on the floor. He then locked the main studio door, the one leading from the apartment hallway from the outside, ensuring it was secure, before exiting through a secondary door into the building's common hallway and re-entering his living space, effectively sealing the studio off. A ridiculous gesture, perhaps, testing whether concealment or orientation mattered to the unseen, invasive force. He camped on the living room sofa, noise-canceling headphones clamped over his ears, attempting distraction via flickering phone screens, forcing wakefulness with sheer willpower until exhaustion finally dragged him under near two. Dread was a physical weight, a cold stone in his stomach as he approached the studio door in the morning. The key turned stiffly in the lock. He pushed the door open, his breath hitched, caught painfully in his throat. There, mocking his precautions, mocking his hope, stood the painting, upright, enthroned once more upon the easel, facing him. He knew with absolute certainty he had left it prone and hidden on the floorboards. Dizziness washed over him, blurring the edges of the room. He advanced slowly, hesitantly, each step heavy as lead. It was utterly transformed, unrecognizably horrific. The sky gaped, a near black void swallowing all light. The meadow had become a nightmare distortion of writhing skeletal trees and corrupted earth, and at its heart, impossibly, the figures stood side by side, stark and unavoidable against the chaos. They stared forward, their faces rendered crudely but with terrifying power, their eyes vast, dark pools that seemed to absorb the dim morning light, reflecting nothing. His mouth was dust. He tried to form a word, a sound, a protest, but nothing emerged. The air hung thick and cloying with the pungent aroma of wet, fresh paint. Then a sound, terrifyingly mundane yet profoundly disturbing in this context. Plink. A single viscous drop of black paint detached itself from the lower edge of the canvas, sliding slowly, inevitably, before falling onto the protective plastic sheeting beneath the easel, a glistening tear shed by the corrupted landscape. Elias stood frozen, pulse frantic against his eardrums, breath sawing in his throat. A tremor started deep in his legs, threatening to buckle them. What now? Destroy it? Flee? The options felt equally futile, equally terrifying. He had tried erasure, he had tried concealment, he had tried surveillance. Nothing worked. The figures returned, stronger, darker, their presence an invasive malignancy feeding on his art, his fear. They watched him. He felt their painted gaze even now, cold and assessing. His palms slicked with sweat, a bitter metallic taste coating his tongue. His jaw ached from unconscious clenching, a knot of terrified tension. So here he remains, Elias, trapped in the threshold of his violated sanctuary, gazing at the warped landscape, the twin abominations with their soul-sucking eyes, too frightened to touch the canvas again, lest it somehow respond, too paralyzed by dread and confusion to step away, to leave the room. The rhythmic thudding in his ears is his own frantic heart, the tightness in his chest, a constant suffocating companion. Should he burn it, run, or simply wait for the next grotesque evolution? He is caught fast in this terrifying loop, the faces seared behind his eyelids each time he blinks, refusing to fade. This space, his home, his studio, feels irrevocably alien, hostile. He doesn't know how to reclaim it, how to make the haunting cease. All he knows with chilling certainty is that his art has been usurped by something inexplicable and malevolent, and each act of resistance only invites a deeper, stranger darkness. That is his reality now. These shaking hands, this fractured narrative whispered into the void, all that remain as he watches and waits for what the next change will bring. That flicker in the estate agent's gaze, a predatory sheen beneath the polish, should have been my cue to flee. But the lock had already snicked home behind me, a sound like a final judgment, and the awful truth bloomed. This was no mere property viewing. It was an arrival, a snare. Weeks I'd spent scouring listings, chafing against the frantic scarcity of the housing market. Then, like a mirage, it appeared. A listing for an exquisite Victorian manse, priced with baffling modesty. Online photographs depicted sprawling, sun-dappled grounds, ornate gables, filigree ironwork, a dream rendered in pixels. Too perfect, perhaps, yet desperation gnawed. I secured an appointment for that very afternoon, hope fluttering nervously against my ribs. The address led me down a serpentine drive, deep into the town's forgotten fringe, where ancient trees interlaced their branches overhead, swallowing the light. Pulling up before the house, I felt a strange collision of wonder and dread. It stood even grander, more imposing than its digital ghost, yet an unnerving stillness clung to it, a palpable weight in the air. The dark windows seemed less like glass, more like vacant eyes engaged in silent scrutiny. A figure awaited me on the veranda, smile stretched wide. He introduced himself as Mr. Thorne, the custodian of this listing. Something about him was magnetic, unsettlingly so. Eyes the color of chipped ice, a practiced ease that smoothed away my nascent fears like a skilled hand calming a spooked horse. My earlier anxieties, I reasoned, were simply nerves stretched taut. I followed him across the threshold. "A singular property," Thorne murmured, his voice resonating in the cavernous foyer. "Held by one lineage for centuries. They've only now relinquished their claim. Your timing is most fortunate." I could only nod, overwhelmed. The interior rivaled the facade. Ceilings vaulted high overhead, woodwork carved with obsessive detail, a magnificent staircase spiraling towards unseen upper reaches, yet a faint, cloying scent like dust and decay and something else unnameable permeated the air. From the periphery of my vision, a flicker, movement. Thorne guided me onward, room after opulent room, his narration a silken thread weaving tales of bygone eras and architectural merit. I drifted in his wake, his voice an almost hypnotic current, until we stood in the vast, shadowed kitchen. Only then did the realization strike. An hour, perhaps more, had elapsed, and not a single query had passed my lips. "Water?" Thorne inquired, already turning towards the archaic sink. "One must stay refreshed." Gratefully, I accepted the proffered glass, thirst suddenly acute. As I drank, he leaned against a time-worn counter, his gaze unwavering, intense. "Your impressions," he pressed softly. "Can you envision your life unfolding within these walls?" A hesitation. The house possessed undeniable beauty, a Gothic allure, yet the wrongness persisted, a dissonant hum beneath the surface. "It's remarkable," I managed, choosing my words with care. "Though I believe I require further contemplation, perhaps a second visit." Thorne's smile didn't falter, but it tightened, infinitesimally. "Assuredly," he replied, his tone like velvet over steel. "But before your departure, one final chamber awaits, the true heart of the residence." He steered me down a corridor I hadn't noticed, unfamiliar and dim. Floorboards groaned a mournful protest beneath our feet. The air turned distinctly chill. We halted before a ponderous door of age-darkened wood. "Here," Thorne breathed, his hand closing over the tarnished knob, "is where the essence resides." He thrust the door inward, revealing not a room, but a void that seemed to drink the light. I leaned forward, squinting into the Stygian gloom. Then a firm pressure on my spine. A shove. I stumbled across the threshold, the heavy door slamming shut behind me with echoing finality. Panic erupted hot and sharp. I whirled, hammering against the unyielding wood. "Thorne, what is this? Open the door." His voice, stripped bare of its earlier warmth, filtered through the barrier. "Impossible, I'm afraid. You misunderstand. This house, it requires sustenance, and you, my dear Eliza, are precisely the offering it craves." Ice sluiced through my veins. A waking nightmare. My fingers scrabbled for my phone. The screen remained stubbornly black. Dead zone. As my vision adapted to the oppressive darkness, shapes began to emerge. A circular chamber. Walls etched with disturbing archaic sigils. At the room's nucleus stood a stone altar. its surface stained with patches of deep, ominous color I refused to identify as blood. Frantically, I scanned for another exit. None. No windows, no other doors. Trapped. Just as despair began its cold embrace, a sound arose. A low, guttural rumble emanating from the very stone surrounding me. The carved symbols started to pulse with a sickly, phosphorescent light. I sensed it then, a vast, ancient consciousness stirring within the room, ravenous and aware. "It awakens," Thorn's voice drifted in, laced with a chilling reverence. "It has thirsted for so long. Do try to be adequate." I recoiled from the glowing walls, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The rumbling intensified, the stone seeming to ripple, to bulge inward, as if something immense pressed against it from beyond. In that crucible of terror, a defiant clarity pierced the fear. I would not perish here, not like this, not as fodder for some architectural horror. My gaze darted wildly, seeking purchase, a weapon, the altar. There, nestled in the shadows, lay a small, wicked-looking knife. It seemed impossibly old, the blade tarnished, crusted. I lunged, my fingers closing around the rough hilt, just as a section of the wall fractured, bursting open. A glistening tentacle, impossibly vast, obscenely alive, lashed towards me. Instinct took over. I slashed wildly with the ancient blade. A connection. The appendage recoiled, emitting a high-pitched shriek that vibrated through the foundations, through my very bones. Galvanized, I turned my fury on the door, hacking at the wood surrounding the lock mechanism. The aged knife bit poorly, progress agonizingly slow. On the other side, I heard Thorn, his composure finally fraying. "Desist," he shouted. "You defile the process." I ignored him, pouring every ounce of strength into the attack. Behind me, the sounds of crumbling stone intensified, the presence swelling, pressing closer. Time was bleeding away. With a final, desperate heave, the wood around the lock splintered. I threw my weight against the door, wrenching it open, colliding almost nose to nose with a stunned Mr. Thorn. Before his shock could translate into action, I shoved past him, launching myself down the hallway in a blind sprint. "Seize her!" Thorn's command echoed sharp and frantic, but to whom? We were alone, weren't we? As I fled, the house itself seemed to rise against me. Eyes in the portrait swiveled, tracking my flight. Floorboards buckled, attempting to snare my feet. Shadows clawed from the corners. I burst into the foyer. Salvation gleamed in the form of the front door. My hand closed on the handle, but something coiled tight around my ankle. Looking down, I saw the fringed edge of the oriental rug animating, its tassels writhing up my leg like vipers. A strangled cry tore from my throat as I hacked at the living fabric with the knife. It hissed, releasing me. I yanked the heavy door open and tumbled out onto the veranda, gasping. The night air struck me cool and real, slicing through the fog of horror. Night? How long had I been inside that place? Thorn's footsteps pounded down the stairs behind me. Without a backward glance, I bolted for my car, keys trembling in my grip. Tires screaming, I tore down the driveway. A final glimpse in the rearview mirror. Thorn standing at the drive's end, his face a rictus of impotent fury, but it was the house looming behind him that froze my blood. every window blazed with an unnatural internal luminescence, and behind the glass I could swear I saw impossible shapes undulating, writhing, tentacles. I drove until dawn painted the horizon, not daring to pause. Finally, at a desolate rest stop, my hands shook too violently to keep the steering wheel steady. I cut the engine and sat, the silence profound, trying to stitch together the shredded edges of reality. Was it possible? A hallucination born of stress and suggestion. Yet the knife lay on the passenger seat beside me, its blade inexplicably clean now, gleaming as if freshly forged. Proof. That house, that entity, and its servant Thorn, they were hideously real, and they remained. I never filed a report. The words would sound like madness. A sentient house that consumes, an estate agent complicit with cosmic abominations. Yet the experience is branded onto my memory. Now every for sale sign, every charming old facade harboring secrets behind a tempting price tag triggers the recall. The gleam in Thorn's eye, the insatiable hunger of the structure, the chilling proximity to becoming another vanished statistic, another whispered local mystery. So, should you find yourself seeking sanctuary, a place to call home, heed this. Sometimes the ideal dwelling finds you, and that encounter might be the most perilous of all. Trust the tremor of unease in your gut, because if it appears too good to be true, it likely is, and it might just be waiting for its next meal. That one slender volume, unassuming amidst its brethren, would unravel the careful weave of my existence was a notion I, Elias Thorne, a seasoned hunter of arcane texts, could never have conceived. My pursuit is the obscure, the forgotten tome. Years I have dedicated to sifting through the detritus of lives concluded, navigating the labyrinthine alleys of online auctions and the hushed, dust-laden corners of antiquarian shops. Encounters with bizarre bindings, cryptic dedications, and the olfactory ghosts of mildew, decay, and vermin are mere occupational hazards. Nothing prepared me for the coverless, nameless artifact that now gnaws at the edges of my sanity. It surfaced months ago amidst the cluttered miscellany of a minor auction house specializing in curiosities both mundane and peculiar. No specific quarry led me there, only the familiar magnetism of stacked paper and ink. A pile sequestered in a dim corner drew my eye. Most were unremarkable, clad in worn jackets or boasting legible titles, but one stood apart. Devoid of jacket or spine inscription, barren on its initial and final leaves, it offered no clue to its identity. The pages possessed a jaundiced pallor, less the golden hue of dignified age than the sickly, grayish tint of prolonged dampness, of cellar-bound neglect. Its binding gaped, threatening to spill its contents should careless hands disturb it. Turning the leaves, my fingers brushed against lines of script utterly alien. No recognizable language, no familiar alphabet. A chaotic tapestry of glyphs, angular scribbles, and what might have been bastardized Latin fragments warred across the pages. A sudden coolness brushed my nape, dismissed then as a mere draft in the cavernous room. I acquired it for a pittance, its soul bitter. Within my sanctum, my library lined with curated oddities and obscure knowledge, I placed the new acquisition. A peculiar pride stirred. Never before had I encountered a text that so thoroughly defied identification. Usually a language family, a script something, yields to scrutiny. This remained stubbornly opaque. The first night passed uneventfully. The book sat upon its designated shelf, the house secured, my slumber undisturbed. Come morning, seeking a different volume for research, my collection meticulously ordered by subject and type, I reached for the newcomer, intending a closer look. Vanished. The space it occupied stood empty. Puzzlement turned to irritation as I scanned adjacent shelves, then my desk, my satchel, nowhere. A momentary lapse, I reasoned, a trick of memory. It would surface. Midday found it sprawled upon the polished mahogany expanse of my coffee table in the living room, brazenly open and changed. The pages, once merely alien, now bore fresh stigmata. Intricate marginalia scrawled alongside the original text. Tiny circles, jagged triangles, furious slashes, all rendered in a dark, visceral crimson. I owned no pen of such a hue. A faint, coppery tang hung in the air, sharp and unsettling. As I closed the volume, the paper felt unnervingly clammy against my fingertips. A lurching sickness bloomed within me, a sudden nausea I attributed foolishly to a skipped breakfast. I returned it to its designated niche in the library, ensuring it was firmly wedged between two weighty guardians. Scarce 10 minutes elapsed before I passed the library door again. A glance confirmed my rising dread. The niche stood vacant. The flanking tomes remained unmoved, but the strange book was gone. Adrenaline surged, a frantic pulse hammering in my ears. Every shelf, the floor, the desk. Searched again. Nothing. Then a soft thud from behind. I spun around. There it lay by the threshold, splayed open, face down. Fallen, perhaps, but from where? No shelf loomed above that spot. My mouth was parchment dry, my thoughts racing for a rational anchor, settling unconvincingly on having jostled something unseen. The subsequent days brought further anomalies. Nightfall delivered susurrations from indeterminate corners of the house. The papery sigh of turning leaves, faint yet distinct. Initially dismissed as the house settling or the murmur of the heating system, the sound sometimes shifted, resolving into a skittering tread, too light, too furtive for mortal feet. I would lie rigid in the darkness, breath held captive in my chest, heart pounding a frantic rhythm. Mornings revealed the volume's relentless migrations, discovered behind the settee, lurking beneath the kitchen table, perched brazenly upon the cool porcelain of the bathroom basin. Each time, new markings had materialized within its pages. The crimson scribbles grew bolder, thicker, sometimes obscuring the original text entirely. Manic repetitions of crudely drawn eyes appeared on some pages. Others displayed chaotic geometries defying interpretation. Online searches for the symbols proved fruitless. A small electronic eye, my webcam, I trained upon its shelf in the library, seeking logic, sleepwalking, perhaps, or an undetected intruder. That evening, I monitored the live feed from my living room laptop. Silence reigned for hours. Around the witching hour of 2, I rose for a glass of water. Upon my return, the monitor showed empty space where the book had been. Rewinding the footage confirmed the impossible. One frame, the book present, solid, undeniable. The very next frame, utter void. No transition, no blur of motion, no intervening hand, simply gone. Instantaneous disappearance. A tremor seized my hand. My breath caught tight in a cage of ribs. 3 times I replayed the sequence. 3 times the stark, impossible transition repeated. Forcing slow, deliberate breaths, I conducted a sweep of the house, banishing shadows with every light switch flicked. I discovered it eventually, abandoned in the hallway's gloom, open to a page showcasing a fresh constellation of sigils. My heart galloped. Pressing fingertips to the page, I recoiled. The paper radiated an unnatural chill, almost icy. The rest of the house felt normal, mundane. Seizing the book, I thrust it into the darkness of a hall closet, turning the key in the lock with a decisive click, grasping at a fragile illusion of control. I contacted Dr. Alistair Finch, a man steeped in textual enigmas, forwarding digital images of the bizarre script and markings. Unprecedented, he murmured through the telephone line, his voice tinged with academic curiosity. He speculated about obscure ciphered journals, perhaps even a lost grimoire. An in-person examination was proposed. A profound, instinctual reluctance stayed my hand. The thought of dispatching it, of letting it travel beyond my immediate sphere, felt inexplicably perilous. Better, I reasoned, to keep it contained, locked away. I promised to reconsider. Containment proved illusory. The locked closet became no barrier. It manifested elsewhere, laid out upon the kitchen worktop as if for breakfast, occupying my favorite armchair, even resting near the foot of my bed. One morning, I awoke with a start, my foot encountering its cold, stiff presence mere inches away. A jolt of ice shot through me and I scrambled from the sheets, heart hammering, skin slick with cold perspiration. With a surge of revulsion, I snatched the book and flung it to the floor. It landed with a dull thud, flopping open. Fresh scribbles glistened wetly under the morning light, though no discernible moisture beaded on the page. One afternoon, a persistent scratching emanated from my study, the dry, rhythmic rasp of nib on parchment. Steeling myself, I entered. There lay the volume, open upon my escritoire. A fountain pen, one of mine, rested upon a page, its nib diligently tracing symbols across the paper's surface. The pen moved unaided. No hand guided its intricate dance. The tip scratched, leaving another line of crimson hieroglyphs. A strangled cry, perhaps a curse, escaped my lips. The motion ceased abruptly. The pen clattered onto the desk. With a resonant thwump, the book snapped shut. I retreated, breath ragged, pulse frantic, sweat cooling on my neck. Logic offered no solace. The house was empty, windows secured, doors bolted. Expulsion became imperative. I conveyed it, encased in the anonymity of a cardboard box, to the municipal recycling depot. With grim determination, I consigned it to the gaping maw of a vast paper receptacle, watching it slide into the jumbled depths. A fragile peace settled, a lightness I hadn't felt in weeks. Until the following dawn. There it rested upon my reading chair in the library, appearing subtly more decrepit, its cryptic adornments darker, somehow more insistent. The edges seemed more frayed, the paper duller, a blow to the gut. My hands turned cold, the coffee mug trembling in my grasp. Abandonment was not an option it permitted. Next, the hearth. Flames embraced the seasoned logs, casting dancing shadows. Hesitation warred with desperation, but the haunting presence could not be endured. With trembling hands, I cast the volume into their fiery midst. Page edges curled, blackened, smoke coiled, acrid and wrong. Less the familiar scent of burning paper, more the stench of brimstone commingled with rank decay. My eyes watered, my throat constricted. Then, inexplicably, the vigorous flames faltered, sputtered, died, collapsing into gray ash. The book sat amidst the embers, scorched and scarred, yet fundamentally whole. The charring itself seemed to have formed new, unsettling patterns upon its ruined surface. Using tongs, my hands shaking uncontrollably, I retrieved it from the grate, overwhelmed by the foul miasma. Into an exterior metal bin I flung it then, doused it liberally with cold water from the garden hose, and slammed the lid shut, leaning against the cool brick wall until the putrid smell dissipated and my breathing steadied. Re-entering the house, I froze. A trail of small, damp prints, distinctly not my own, led from the garden door across the polished parquet floor toward my library, terminating near the very shelf the book had once occupied. They lingered, glistening under the indoor light, stark evidence of what? They remained until evaporation claimed them, leaving only the chilling certainty and the echo of their passage. I resolved finally to face it directly. I opened the covers again, steeling myself against the pervasive miasma of decay that clung to it. The text remained a maddening enigma, yet amidst the escalating chaos of glyphs and crimson scrawls, certain phrases, certain sequences of symbols seemed to echo, repeating with unsettling regularity. The marginalia had grown, sprawling across the original script, rendering it nearly illegible. My eyes stung. A burning sensation prickled in my sinuses. Flipping through the resistant pages, searching for any familiar sign, any anchor in the madness, my gaze snagged on a fragment of trembling script, starkly different from the rest. English, crude and shaky, leave me unseen. A visceral clench tightened in my gut. I slammed the volume shut, tossing it onto the desk, backing away as if from a venomous thing. Hours I spent thereafter feigning normalcy, adrift in the meaningless glow of digital distractions, yet the tension remained, a taut wire humming constantly beneath my skin. Every floorboard groan became a footfall, every settling sigh of the old house a whispered threat. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see it perched on a nearby surface. As dusk bled into night, the silence grew oppressive, amplifying my own ragged breathing. Eventually, nerving myself, I approached my study. The door creaked open, the desk vacant. The pen lay on the floor nearby, beside a small drying pool of that viscous metallic-smelling ink. A chill raised gooseflesh on my arms. Though the room was warm, the window shut fast. Then I noticed the closet door stood open, just a crack. Slow steps, cautious breath held tight, heartbeat thudding against my eardrums. Peering inside, I saw it. There, upon the highest shelf, leaning against a dusty box, it rested, pages parted as if awaiting scrutiny. Hesitantly, I reached. The paper felt frigid beneath my fingertips, unnervingly yielding like corrupted flesh. My hand recoiled instinctively, tingling. Something felt profoundly wrong about its texture. Steeling myself against the revulsion, I grasped it firmly, lifted it down, and set it on the floor. Is it sentient? A vessel for something else? Or mere delusion born of isolation and stress? I cannot definitively say. All I know is this: it shifts unseen. It self-annotates with ink I do not provide. It cultivates a suffocating sense of being watched. Sleep offers no true refuge. Headaches are constant companions, and the very air in my home feels thick, static, expectant. Disposal failed. Destruction failed. Containment failed. It endures. It returns relentlessly. It seems tethered now, not to the house, but to my awareness. Each attempt to sever the bond, each act of resistance, only appears to invigorate it, drawing me deeper into its suffocating mystery. I yearn for the moment it vanishes for good, yet a grim certainty settles within me. It will not leave. It is attached. Right now, it resides in my study. Faintly through the heavy oak door, I hear it, the dry rustle, the whisper-soft turn of a page. If I steel myself to peer through the doorway's gap, I can sometimes glimpse the edge of a leaf folding over, moved by no visible agency. Fear roots me here in the relative safety of the hallway, yet fear simultaneously propels me toward that room, toward the source of the sound. My palms dampen, my stomach churns in a cold knot. What design does it follow? What does it want? It is not finished with me, Elias Thorne. Of that I am horribly certain. And what unfolds next? What culmination awaits in the unnerving silence between the turning of its pages remains shrouded in the chilling, encroaching unknown.